So, right. So best of luck to everyone. And without any further ado, we welcome Prime Minister.
Hi, am I audible?
You are.
Great. Give me a second. Okay. The price for a lawyer is not just the money you pay, but also the quality you get back. From opening government, we have two cases. One on why we create more efficient corporations that are able to give proper justice to people. And secondly, why we increase the amount of accessibility to the lawyer industry, both increasing the amount of lawyers, but also making their lives a bit easier. Before that, some framing. Why lawsuits and generally justice is generally inaccessible to the average person? I think we have two reasons for this. One, I think that there are very few people who are able to climb up the partnership ladder. This is because generally you have to pay a long time in the company for people to gain trust. You need to have enough funding and income on your own to be able to invest in the company itself, but also because people have other things to do. And generally, there are very few people who can rise up to the status. But secondly, in general, there are these partnerships have incentives to not scale up. This means that there are very few lawyers in general that are able to be in these particular partnerships, decreasing the amount of supply you have to lawyers and increasing the cost of eventual trials. Going to our first claim, why there is more efficiency? Because we have a more centralized approach. Why a more centralized system is more efficient than partnerships in general? I think three reasons for that. One, it has to do with decision making. It is that the company itself and mostly their only motive is profit driven. This means that they want to maximize the amount of people who are able to get access to this particular lawyers, because in order for them to maximize the amount of money they're going to get from them. Now, partnerships do not have necessarily the same incentive because different partners get different royalties from said company. Therefore, it's a direct competition inside the company itself. But also, many partners might have different approaches to how the company might want to function. Somebody might want to do more pro bono cases. Somebody might want to focus more on civil cases rather than criminal cases. This ultimately means that there is less strategy and centralized approach to maximizing the amount of cases that are possibly done. Secondly, I think new talent is limited in a partnership model. This is because, one, it is harder for you to approach them because it is hard for them to initially invest if they want to become partner from the get-go. But secondly, it is hard for them to buy into a system where they have to invest a large amount of time. But also, thirdly, centralized systems are way less personalized. This means to have less contact with a specific case you're running and trying to affect. This means then that you take less sentimental value, you're more likely to view it in an objective manner and spend less time on it and spend it more efficiently. Why partnerships models in general are not scalable? Two reasons. One, I think firstly, it has to do with complexity. The more partners you add to the system, the more people have say over the company, but also take stuff from the company itself. This means that there is a capacity to how many partners you potentially can have in one company. Keep in mind, building new companies requires assets and investment and risk. This means that it is harder in opposition's world to build a lot of partnership companies. This means that probably in opposition, there are some partnership companies, but they're not as many as potentially could be in or scaling to the amount of complexity that can happen to a centralized model. But secondly, there is less incentive to scale up partnerships. This is because you do not want to lose the pie or the amount of percentage of the pie you have. This means you're more likely to scrutinize young lawyers. You're less likely to allow them to climb up the ladder, and therefore I will impact this in the second case. But what this also means is that there is less incentive to hire, plus there is less incentive to grow. Why investment increases, particularly in equity firms? Three reasons. One, I think there is amount of money to gain from the stock market the moment that equity firms might do a good job having a lot of cases and get money from it. This means that private investors have an incentive to particularly invest in equity firms to gain more money. Secondly, I think corporations have also an incentive to invest in these equity firms because they're able to reduce their own costs of like their own legal offices, this means then that they have an extra incentive to invest more in these equity firms. And thirdly, I think partnerships in general are not very investable because the ownership themselves is part of the partner. This means that no outside funding can come from these partnerships. You cannot increase the amount of capital that is in a private partnership. Why then equity firms having more money means cheaper in general lawsuits and trials? I think three reasons. One, it has to do with competition. Competition exists both in partnerships and equity models, but equity models can take the hit from decreasing prices since there is an investment initially. This means that prices for lawsuits and generally justice can decrease. Secondly, I think that overall, there is also an incentive to increase the amount of consumers, which you can do now since you have more lawyers working for you, since you do not require them any partnership model or like them owning parts of the company. This means then that you have more people to cater to more things, as this can only happen the point you have more money to pay to salaries, etc. And I think thirdly, this means that you can also build similar models in areas that might not be such accessible, since you have the initial funding to do so without people needing to spend money to generate a company from the start, like in a partnership model. I'll take Sio. Oh.
Yeah, what happens if an equity firm chooses not to invest in law firms? Then they just shut down.
Okay, a partnership might shut down. It is very much easier to shut down to a point that the partner leaves or multiple partners leaves, and now the company has less assets to go around with and less salary to pay. Okay. Second claim: more people are able to become lawyers because you have more choice in the lawyer industry. Why it is hard to leave if you are in a partnership? I think three reasons. One, even if you're not a partner, you have already built up enough amount of time in the company for you to become a partner. This means that you're mostly stuck in the same job in order for you to rise up the ranks. Secondly, you most likely have invested at least some property into this company if you're a partner. This means leaving the company means also leaving the property behind. Therefore, it is hard for you to do that, not only for bureaucratic reasons, but also because there might be loss in the process. What does this mean? This means that competition between partnerships is worse because you do not compete for salary. Lawyers are stuck in the same corporation, meaning that there is no trade of talent and you don't maximize efficiency between these companies. Lawyers are stuck and therefore worst case come out, plus they're more expensive. Vote OG.
I'd like to thank Speaker for a speech, and now I'd like to invite the first speaker for the opposition.
Cool. Am I audible?
You are?
Perfect. I would like to record my speech so that I can send it to my coach. Obviously, if speakers from GovBench are giving POIs, then they would be in it. So I just want to check with GovBench that they're all cool with that being a thing that could happen.
Yeah, that's fine.
Cool.
CG.
Perfect. Oh, yeah, I assume we're all cool. Cool. Okay, 2 seconds and then I'll get started. We'll start with the responses to opening government, then talk about why you worsen the quality of representation that people have access to, and then thirdly, why you worsen firm operation. First, the responses to opening government. The first thing they say, and that hinges their case on like how many lawyers we have access to, is that law firms just don't upscale. This is untrue. They say it doesn't happen because there's like a limited number of partners you can have, but that's only true when there's only when the pie is only so large. That means that when you do upscale, when you gain a larger share of the market, you are able to have more partners because there is more to go around and you have more space at the table, right? That's what you see with like the magic circle firms in the UK or big law firms all over the world, where they are literally massive. Like law firms, as we see status quo, are some of the highest earning firms in existence. It's just clearly untrue to say that they all stay the same size from the start and never try to grow and never try to add more partners. The second thing they say is that you have less lawyers because they all feel disconnected. Firstly, this is just generally not true in the way that firms operate. Oftentimes, the cases that you're working on have to have partner oversight because you need somebody that's incredibly knowledgeable in the department, in the sector that you're working a case in all those kinds of things. for that case to be operated successfully. That means that even from when you're an associate, only starting work on specific cases, you do often have direct contact and liaison with a partner within that firm, because they need to be the one that's checking all the crossing the T's, dotting the I's, because they're the one that actually talks to the client that you're working for. So it is usually the case that you do have connection to the partner from the get-go, because that's just what makes the most sense for firms to operate. The second thing they say is that partners get really territorial, and you're really scrutinized, and they hire less people. This is just also not true, because oftentimes you have to be in a firm for a very, very long time. We're talking like decades here for you to make partner. That means that the new hires that a partner is talking to, or even if they end up making partner in that firm, aren't even going to be making partner probably before that partner has retired. So they literally feel no threat coming from you and have no incentive to be like overly territorial or aggressive towards you or not hire you. But beyond that, partners recognize the good of the firm. They know that you need to have new partners and have new blood coming in for that firm to actually continue to operate, because eventually the existing partners are going to retire, and at that point somebody needs to be made partner again. So there is the encouragement of law firms to be incentivizing people to go to that firm and stay in that firm. So it just doesn't make sense that that's the reason why there aren't enough lawyers status quo. But secondly, they say like, more people become lawyers as a result because there's less of this. I think actually less people become lawyers at this point, because oftentimes making partner and being in control of a very successful law firm, being on the board of that law firm, is a major goal of a lot of people when they go into law, because they want to be seen to be at the lead, at the top highest end of their field. They want to be incredibly successful, and so when the highest they can achieve is like senior, like associate, right, like just the level beyond trainee, then they just stagnate because they're never in control of any of the decisions beyond that. It probably makes people less happy with their careers, because they get to a point where they're like in their 30s or mid-30s, and that's it until they retire. That probably disincentivizes people from becoming and staying lawyers, because there's significantly less of a reward even if you work for the same company for like decades. Also, Also, I think in terms of access and in terms of investment and things like that, they just say, you might lose partners or whatever. But note, if an equity firm doesn't want to invest in you, for example, because there is lots of competition and service-based industries can often be like quite tenuous based off of the talents that they're able to draw in or things like that, it can make investments seem very risky. I think opening government need to do a better job of proving that equity firms would actually be willing to come in and invest in a significant amount of law firms, because otherwise access significantly falls to our side of the house, at the point where more law firms are likely to shut down because they can't get a private equity firm to invest in them when they already have like such a diversified portfolio. Okay, why do you worsen the quality of representation then? Opening government analyze that these companies are entirely profit motivated. The only thing they care about is the books that they are checking in like your quarterly financial reports. What does that mean? It means they are focusing exclusively on what makes money. That means two things. Firstly, less pro bono work. I'd very likely to be the very first thing asked when it comes to making sure that you are keeping your books as good as possible. Note, even if opening government get all their benefits of like making representation a little bit more affordable, there are people on the ground who will literally never be able to afford a lawyer unless it is entirely free for them, right? It is either pro bono work or it is a court-appointed lawyer for them. That means that when those kinds of things get axed, it is far less likely that they're able to access any kind of like pro bono work or actually get somebody like competent to represent them. But secondly, in terms of allocation of company like resources, it's far more likely to go to the most wealthy of clients on the cases that they have, even if it's something that's very, very simple, even if it's something that like doesn't actually take that much resources, simply because they want to be like having the most billable hours towards that client so that they can make as much money off them as possible, because they know that client can pay, compared to a relatively less wealthy client who might need resources more for a case that is more serious or has more damages associated or a higher potential penalty, but that just can't give you as much money as like some oil baron, for example. But the impact of that is that you get worse representation, because it's likely that more people have to turn to court-appointed lawyers. But note, court-appointed lawyers, even in status quo, even with pro bono work, are already overworked, are already likely inexperienced, because that's why they go into like being a court-appointed lawyer to get more experience, and so already do bad jobs representing people because they don't have the time, they don't have the resources, and they don't have the energy to do a good enough job for every client. That's why when you have a court-appointed lawyer, you are significantly more likely to take a plea deal, because they are likely to pressure you into it to save time. This means that when this kind of thing happens more often, it's far more likely that more innocent people either go to jail or pay fines or pay like settlements that they don't have the money for or were never actually guilty of in the first place, which is just generally a harm. But also, when you misallocate those resources, it is more likely to get worse outcomes for the people who are not at the very highest end. The comparative is that when, before I go on, I'll take a POI from closing if they have one.
Yeah, like why do you think that by mere virtue of ownership of PE firms, then you cannot become a board member. Like PE firms have an incentive to still put lawyers on the board, so they run it because it's technically law.
Yeah, but if they want to override you, like for example, if they're not like if you're like, we want you to be making more money to show us a return, which is what opening government is saying they would be likely to do, then that, like I don't understand why they wouldn't want to do that. So even if they have an input, as long as they own your company, they can ignore that input whenever they want. The comparative then is that when lawyers lead, it is significantly less likely that this happens because lawyers are incredibly versed in ethics because you have to be to actually be allowed to become a lawyer and so are highly knowledgeable in like the ethics of like making sure that people have access to fair representation. But also they trust in the law. It's something they've practiced and something they probably believe in to a certain degree. And so they understand the importance of everybody having access to as good a representation as possible. Likewise, they've also probably seen the system fail people who've accessed court-appointed lawyers. And that's often reasons why firms like that do pro bono work in the first place. And so note, even if it's only one less case of pro bono work, the impact that can have on a person that desperately needs it, that would be like going to jail or paying massive amounts out otherwise, is incredibly massive, but it happens on a way bigger scale at the point where all massive firms are owned by private equity companies, because the scale they would drop pro bono work is likely also massive. For that reason, you lose so much value in representation. So proud to oppose.
I would like to thank Speaker very much for the speech, and I would like to invite the second speaker for the government.
Great. Am I audible?
Yes.
Okay, give me a second. I'm sorry. So, yeah. Please go away. Okay, I assume I'm audible as the like 10 seconds ago. Start my speech in 3, 2, 1. I think the path to victory from open government is simple. We're going to prove, and we have already proven, that we have A, more effective calculus on how to run a company, B, more money coming into the market, which means more profit margins, which means you have a better breathing when it comes to this decision making, but also how you apply your job. But then 3, we're going to flip opening opposition. We're going to explain why there is more likelihood you're going to have more pro bono cases and all this stuff. Opening opposition has 2 things so far. The first thing they have is, look, you're not a threat to partners, because they're going to retire and they know that the company is enlarging, therefore they want to include more people. 2 reasons why this is not the case. A, even if you retire, you're still a partner, you still have returns, you still have royalties. This means you don't have any incentive to like split up your own percentages. You have no incentive to give up your position, because even if you retire, you can still own the company, you can still earn returns. Therefore, the intuition that there is always space in the table because you see this in the movies is not compelling enough, structurally speaking, to prove that there is more space for more people to be included. The second thing they say is then, you have connection with associates because they have a direct contact with you because you cater to clients. If they say that the companies are so big that partners are too busy enlarging the company, how it is that the proximity with associate is so condensed that you can actually pinpoint the most meritful associates to actually, upgrade them to partners? All of this in the bottom line is really assertive or uncertain why there is an incentive to actually enlarge the companies, why it is an incentive to give more space. I think the more realistic approach is that it's really stacked, right? It is more elitistic and it's more a priori. If you have the capital, you create your own company and you're the boss of yourself. I'm going to later in the reconstruction of our case prove more on that and actually explain why equity firms are better off. The second thing they say is, look, if we have lawyers choosing cases, because lawyers are ethical and because they abide by the law, they're going to choose the good cases that are going to do more pro bono versus the bad capitalists that they want to maximize profit. This is crazy logic from opening opposition. I think partners also want to maximize profit because it's their own pocket. This means that their own pocket don't want to take the high case profile. They want to have as much as return from the cases they choose, right? So if I'm a partner, I'm going to take the high case profile. I'm going to point the company towards only the profit cases. I don't see why the private equity firm is the only bad capitalist. I don't buy the characterization that all lawyers are ethical. Probably that's not the case. Probably they're desensitized by the law. Probably they are desensitized by the banality of evil of humanity because they have to defend scumbags and stuff like that. They have desensitized themselves from being ethical. So I think this is a very assertive characterization from opening opposition. Bottom line, they haven't proven increase on pro bono cases, and they haven't proven why there is a capacity to include more lawyers. Let's see now what we bring forward. A, effectiveness on running the case. I think in answer to the house, you have venture capitals, A. You have B, you have hedge funds. You have multinational companies that have huge profit margins, that they have this kind of money being stacked around, and they want to invest this money in order to be able to make more money, right? All of this means that they have a good decision-making team that will assess each portfolio of each company and will assess the profit margins and the prosperity of this company, how likely is this company to grow and stuff like that. I think this is way more effective than opposition for two key reasons. A, I think the partners are resistant to change. They are more subjective. You cannot run a managerial position at the same time being a lawyer. I think these have a conflict of interest exactly because you don't have either the sentimental capacity to be able to actually switch your opinion, but also you have a conflict of interest because your own pocket is on the line. Therefore, you're not likely to be easy to be swayed around. You're gonna fight with other partners. These models are consensus-based models because your ass is on the line. Therefore, the delay and the bureaucracy of disagreements and disputes over opposition side is way immense when it comes to proving why companies can adapt, why companies can be sustained, why companies won't break apart because a partner pulls out and then the company downsizes and people are laid off. I think in answer to the house, the second benefit you have is a surplus from diversifying your income, right? So if you're a hedge fund, right, and I have 3 different lawyer companies and each company is giving me 5% of profit, this means I have some type of safety net to be able to take more risk, right? Because even if one company does not produce enough profit, then the other 2 can actually produce enough profit. This means you're not as risk averse and you're not as urgent when it comes to you need money right now. In the rest of the house, most partners are risk averse. A. B, they want to, to take most returns. This means they're likely to, get in their pocket the profits of the company just to, compensate themselves for the initial capital they brought into the company. This means A, less royalties, but also worse wages for good and talented lawyers, because most partners will take most of the shares. Inside the house, private equity firms can be more meritocratic when it comes to their criteria of assigning profits, the criteria of assigning royalties, because the lawyer that is more productive and the lawyer that is more precise is the lawyer that is get more money. So in answer to the house, first benefit, we lower the threshold of barrier of entry to create your own company. It's not only about English and bratty ass people creating their own company, Americans that actually have the capital and the family to sustain them to create company, but it's also like talented lawyers that will never have this kind of capital to be able to have their own grassroots company to produce good, to be able to do good and provide services. Before that, CO, your extension engage, come on.
So I agree with you that these firms want a diversified portfolio. That probably means that they stretch very thin. They probably have only one person to oversee all of the law firms. Isn't it better to have many people within a specific law firm that are invested?
It is preposterous to claim that the hedge fund, a venture capital, has only one person to assign all companies. It is insane logic. I assume the decision-making of a venture capital and the assessment of a portfolio is most effective than their own subjective partners that are within the storm to be able to assess what is the best decision-making for the company. All in all, what we prove in opening government is really simple, and it's a path to victory. We think that because you have more influx of capital within the market of lawyers, and because you have a lower threshold in order to create a company, you have more startups and more companies within good lawyers, with talented lawyers that can actually be hand-handed by good venture capitals that are doing good research. But then 2, I think the moment you have less pressure to produce capital and less pressure to produce profit, because it's not your ass on the line, but you have a company backing you and actually giving you influx if you bankrupt and stuff like that, you can actually do more pro bono cases, right? Because this is the moment that you don't have your boss hanging around your head that wants to maximize returns. This is the moment that you can actually flip opening opposition and say pro bono is more likely. I think lawyers are pretty shitty people opening government.
I'd like to thank Speaker for a speech, and I'd like to invite the second speaker for the opposition.
Sorry, just getting settled. Is it okay if I do the same thing as Shane and get my speech recorded with everyone? Okay. couple of responses to opening government. First, I'm going to talk about is individual partners not wanting new talented lawyers to come into their business for fear of them decreasing the amount of money that they make. And why it is the case that actually these companies always want to grow and are always trying to look out for the new talent. First reason is that most of the companies that we're talking about are incredibly large and making a huge amount of money. That is to say that they represent some of the largest companies in the world when they are facing lawsuits. They also in many different areas of law, and that goes down also to smaller companies that are trying to build their way up in order to compete in their market and in the place and the locality where they exist. This means that because there are multiple different law firms that are constantly trying to compete against each other in order to provide the best service and also provide the best service to clients in order to make sure that clients are up to date on what it is they need to be up to date on, that communication is something that they appreciate from their lawyers, to make sure that the service is one that clients generally enjoy, is oftentimes an incredibly competitive industry where details are very important. The way that somebody presents themselves is very important. And the amount of team members that you have on a job is something that's important because response time becomes something that is vital to individuals. This is particularly valuable because these companies are able to make upwards of like 50 million on one case that they might be participating in. And so the idea that these companies are like lacking some sort of funding or investment is like preposterous, because the amount of money that like most law firms are able to make within the law, even if they are small, is quite large, given the stakes that are often that are often at stake in the area of law, where companies are involved, where individuals' livelihoods are involved. What we think that this means is because competition is so big, you are constantly on the lookout for individuals who have the necessary talents and the necessary the necessary qualifications and skills in order to perform that duty in a way that is going to be beneficial. What this means is that you're constantly trying to attract the best graduates who are coming from law schools. You're constantly trying to attract the individuals that you think are going to be able to add to your company's business, but also you want to prevent them from going to your competitors' companies and benefiting them in the future. What this means, it is actually very much incentivized for these companies to ensure that the graduates and individuals that could grow into lawyers into the future are the type of people that come into their company. And it's important to the company that they stay within that company as well, because they want to make sure that they don't go to their competitors once they've received training in order to add to them and challenge them in the future. What we think that this means is that oftentimes perks are given to these lawyers, and also the capacity for growth for these lawyers are quite large within partnered firms. But this is particularly the case within these partnered firms, given that these partners have a special connection with these individuals. I think that this is something that was also contested. Opening government said that you likely don't have that much access to partners on our side. But I don't think this is true, because most of the time within most corporate environments, you're likely to work in a team where you have a team lead, and that team might be part of another like larger team that you might also work within. So even if it is the case that your partner is quite busy, it's likely that you're not too far away from interacting with them. And it's likely that you will probably interact with them at some point. Meaning that although partners do have other responsibilities, they also have specializations that they work within their teams in order to ensure that they are working correctly upon those specializations. This is particularly important in law as well, because law isn't just the case that you are a lawyer and you cover all aspects of the law. It is the case that you likely are going to specialize in one area of the law and then work in that area for a long period of time. What this means is that individuals, such as partners who are interested in pro bono work, are likely going to pursue pro bono work because that is their specialization that they have spent time training in, not necessarily because they're a good person, but it's what they are necessarily good at, and it's what they want to engage in. It's a personal interest for them. But this is also the case for other forms of law that are like oftentimes neglected by the larger law firms that have the most type of resources, such as things like environmental law or family law, which oftentimes look after the most vulnerable individuals and try and bring justice for individuals for which is happening. But partners also are more likely to face personal scrutiny than individuals within an equity firm. This is another reason why they're more accountable and why you get better results on our side of the house. because when you have personal accountability and there is a face that you can look at on a website and say, this is the partner who has made these decisions, rather than a faceless private equity firm, law firms are now more accountable in the decisions that they make into the future, and individuals are more likely to scrutinize them as an individual. This means that these partners have more of a personal responsibility and therefore are more likely to act in a more ethical way, responding to the point from opening government. I think that this is also pretty important in relation to the pro bono work and kind of works to flip their case. Because although they prove that you're likely to have some more form of money on their side of the house because you're better able to get individuals investing money into it, they never prove why there is an incentive still for them to work in that pro bono area. I.e., if you want to increase your reputational sort of standing, then it's likely you could just work in community projects or something, not something that otherwise would have cost you a whole department that you have to put a lot of money into ensuring that they're working in that way. On the comparative, when you have a person who is interested in pro bono work, or they're personally responsible and can be challenged on that front, is then more likely that you're going to engage in that pro bono work to begin with. Before I move on, closing. Opening?
I think accountability is symmetric when it comes to case-by-case lawyers being accountable. I think you also have to prove why you have more likelihood of actually sustaining these companies and to not actually get like more promotion in your side of the house where the criteria is more personal, sentimental, and stacked.
Okay, so the reason why this personal connection is really important is because in law, having a personal connection with not only clients and the decision-making that is made on a larger level, but also having a personal connection with the individuals who are working and the leadership is incredibly important. The law is constantly changing. It evolves. Oftentimes, courts make decisions, which means that new laws come into place. There are revisions on those laws. You need to be able to act in a way that is quick as possible. This often looks like strategies changing for these law firms in over days, which oftentimes could take far longer if the board has to make those decisions and aren't on the ground to communicate with those clients. As I said, it's about the client services. If you have an individual who is on the board who is dealing with you, then that is something that is infinitely beneficial in regards to earning money. This is on the comparative something you can never get because those equity individuals aren't working in that area. For those reasons, please do oppose.
I would like to thank Speaker very much for a speech, and I would like to invite the third speaker for the government.
Hi guys, am I audible?
Yep, you are.
Okay. Can you check if this is audible for you? Let me just start my timer. I'll take POIs in the chat space, so feel free to put your POI requests there. Most likely I'll take one from opening before the 5th minute, but if it's past 5th minute and I've not taken you, you can unmute and then ask. Okay, I'm going to begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. First, I'm going to deal with opening opposition, provide a context, and explain why we win this debate from closing gov. So opening opposition says their biggest problem is that lawyers are far more likely to not find the job attractive. Why? Because now they can't become named partners in a law firm. That means that they reduce the number of lawyers, and then all of a sudden there's pressure on pro bono lawyers, etc. I think on their side, they don't prove why this hijack or this blockade doesn't exist. Because, for instance, on their side, lawyers can also only become named partners. For instance, when one of the partners retire, which you never know when that is going to happen, or when they die, or if you are from a big family law legal name that you have connections within the upper echelons of the legal corridors for you to be able to become partners. I don't know how much of feasibility that exists on their side, that once you are not owned by a PE firm and you are owned by partnerships, then once you walk in, you can become a partner. And then that means that you are able to get all these motivations that they analyze. So even though they assert that motivation doesn't exist on our side, they don't prove why it exists on their side anyway. But on the comparative, I just POI them. It is unreasonable to think that once PE firms are owning that particular law firm, it means that lawyers cannot become named, cannot hold managerial positions or get on the board. Because note, it only means that the structure of that company reforms. Maybe you're on the board, but you are not necessarily the owner, but you are still calling the shots. You are part of the people making those decisions. And this is far more democratic. Why? Because now PE firms are likely going to be making these decisions based on performances rather than based on whether or not you were part of those who started the law firm from the scratch. And regardless of whether or not you came in today, PE firms are much more likely going to be caring, given that there's no nepotistic affiliations within those situations. I'll deal with their second extensions on pro bono lawyers and the pressure that comes with them. Let's talk about the context. Note, this motion requires context because it needs to happen in situations where PE firms have A, an incentive to buy the firm, B, see it as a worthy investment, and C, the owners of those law firms are also likely to sell. Because note, PE firms don't just hijack firms, they need to get consent from these owners to make a willing decision to be able to buy or sell off these firms to the private equity firms. This context is needed for this motion to be functional. Hence, any team that misses it is one that is unlikely to win. Now, how do PE firms decide on what firms to buy? Usually, they conduct a feasibility and operational analysis to check the current performance of the firms and usually buy two sets of categories of firms. A, firms heading for bankruptcy and collapse because their operational models and finances are no more sustainable, which you call struggling firms. Probably they've made certain risky financial decisions that blew back and so they are no more sustainable. Or B, firms with high potential but are significantly underperforming due to operational inefficiencies that exist. Why is this important? Because A, PE firms buy firms to revamp and sell for higher prices to make profit years later, which means they usually buy firms that have high profit potential and high profit ceilings, but that are not currently there. But secondly, these are the only owners of the firms who are far more likely to sell their firms, their law firms to PE firms because they know they are no more financially sustainable. Not billion-dollar super profitable firms who have zero incentive to sell these firms to PE firms. Then the question is, why is it good for law firms in these situations to move from partnerships to private equity models, which is the extension that closing government brings to you within this debate? Let's talk about the comparative. On up, most likely these firms keep the partnerships, and knowing that they've made terrible financial decisions, they are failing, they are likely to go bankrupt and fail. Two impacts from this. A, owners go home with nothing because their law firms have failed and usually they even end up in debt. Or B, and also B, employees are usually laid off. Check the comparative on our side. They sell these firms to private equity firms, which means that the owners are able to get a much more decent income from the sale. And so, for instance, they are able to get certain remnants in terms of income for their pensions, but also even to start and open another firm in the future if they still have the passion to do so. This is structurally beneficial to the legal industry on our side comparative to their side. Secondly, employees that are likely to be laid off on their side are much more likely to keep their jobs on our side, which increases the job security statistics in the law firm, which accesses a lot more of OO's impact about people making these decisions based on whether or not there is far more job security within the legal space. I think we proved that more on their side. A lot of these firms fail. Why? Because they oppose a transition that is the only way to keep them surviving. The second comparative then is for law firms that have high potential but are underperforming. A lot of these law firms, they are never able to maximize their potential on up. Why? Because they usually have huge annual costs that become unsustainable because of operational inefficiencies, but also they never get to employ more people and function properly because they are never able to optimize their finances and operations highly. Comparative to our side, given the structural incentive, but also given that PE firms usually have a huge track record of successes and turning such failing companies or such underperforming companies into high-performing companies and selling them off later, they are much more likely to optimize their functionality and reduce wastage spending, which means that they're able to make the firm far more sustainable in the long term, retaining all the employees and making it much more feasible for them to run. But secondly, it makes it much more profit to be able to employ more people, but also make it far more beneficial for people who have stakes within these firms. And this is far better and far more sustainable on our side. I'll explain why this is crucial before then closing up.
It is unclear what exactly these firms can identify that a successful lawyer can't. If there's a mid-tier lawyer that wants to become a managing partner, why doesn't he just join the optimized firm that you talk about?
No, you don't get the point. The point is that private equity firms are the guys with the loads of money. They've made the money. they want to inject it in areas that are failing. On your side, these lawyers, no matter how talented they are, given the context that I've just analyzed, do not have the financial capacity to be able to execute these things in ways that are sustainable. Let's talk about the impacts then. It means that on their side, there is far more unemployed people in the legal field, which means that there is the collapse of these firms usually make the legal job far less attractive. But on the comparative, we are able to increase much more lawyers, and we are able to reduce the number of people who, for instance, go to law school and don't get jobs, because now there are much more optimally performing legal firms that are able to employ you. But also, it means that, look at, for instance, in Ghana, because of the restricted nature of the law firm employing capacity, they equally restrict access to legal education. So there is a strong cutoff for the number of people who can take the bar or can go to the law school after their degree, LLB, right? What it means is that on our side, given the increasing capacity that comes in some of these spaces, there's much more accessibility to legal education, which creates the inflow of much more lawyers within the system, which offsets all the demand that opening opposition talks about, but also doesn't make a huge sort of pressure on pro bono lawyers in ways that make their work far more shittier, which means that there's far more layoffs on their side, but also a lot of legal firms collapse because they do not have the option to transition. We give them that option in the most reasonable context. Never been this proud to propose.
I would like to thank Speaker very much for the speech, and I would like to invite the third speaker for the opposition.
Hi, am I clearly audible?
Yes.
Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm going to talk about why lawyers make better management choices for law firms than private equity firms would, flipping OG's metrics, probably CG's too. I don't know. I was busy analyzing. If I have time, I'll run a second point on monopolization, why it's, or oligopolization, why it's likely and why it's harmful. Let's get into the first point then. I want to start by giving MEX for why private equity is bad, then I'll give some MEX for why lawyers are uniquely good, and then I'll give impacting for this. Starting with MEX for why private equity is bad. Note first that private equity is stretched thin. They don't know what specific fields or companies they're going to succeed at. So what they do is they try to throw shit against the wall and see what sticks. They often invest in fields where they have fairly little expertise and have individuals within the company managing diverse portfolios. That means that a person who might be a business major with a minor in corporate law could find themselves managing corporate and family and criminal law firms, despite not being a lawyer and not having expertise in them. On our side, you have highly focused management. So a corporation that focuses on criminal law will have management who are all experts in criminal law making the decisions at the end of the day. Their attention is focused on the day-to-day of the firm rather than split between many firms at once. Secondly, note that at the end of the day, a private equity firm has a single individual who makes the decisions. A private equity firm has an owner, one person who is in charge of the company and gets an absolute vote. On our side, we have many senior partners who all have a say in votes, meaning that the mistakes that a managing partner might make are held accountable and corrected. Note, these leaders of private equity firms have been engaged for a long time in business and are unlikely to listen to advice. They see themselves as experts. They see themselves at the top of a pyramid that is very hierarchical. Oftentimes, though, in order to get to that position, it was luck, since investment isn't shown to be smarter than a 50-50 coin toss. Probably they got money from their father to start the investment. They had the privilege of going to a very good business school, but it doesn't mean that they're actually good at making decisions. Finally, the solo management leads to yes-manning. Everyone in the company cares about appealing to the boss. They don't have any incentive or capacity to interfere with the boss's decisions. This is in contrast to managing partners in law firms who are held accountable by the rest of the partners, who can even have a vote of no confidence to replace the partner who is managing. Let's give some X now that are specific to why lawyers are better. First, I want to talk about the incentives of lawyers. Being directly invested in the law firm means that they're directly incentivized for the law firm to succeed. The bottom line of the law firm affects my bottom line, so does the reputation of the law firm, so does the connections it has and maintains with clients. In contrast, in private equity firms, most employees are not directly incentivized because they don't own part of the company. It means that they care about how their boss perceives them, they care about yes-manning, and they care about succeeding at specific tasks that they were given. But they are disincentivized from conflicting with others in the company for any reason, which could create conflict. They're especially disincentivized from criticizing what the boss says. Secondly, long-term incentives. Lawyers, as OG say, most lawyers will see most of the benefits from being an associate and then a junior partner and then a senior partner in a law firm only in the long term. That means that they care about the long-term success of the company. They don't want to take wild bets in the near future for something that could succeed greatly or could bankrupt the company. They care about stable, sustainable, long-term growth and maintaining clients in the long term. This is opposed to equity firms that are used to having short-term investments, selling off and divesting from specific companies and fields, and playing the market as it goes. Finally, moving on to expertise. Lawyers have specific expertise to their field of the law. They understand the nuances of decisions, such as which client to take and why, so which client to take and which not to, or which strategy is going to work in a specific case and which won't. This is a result of them having long and good education in law, having a natural affinity to law, and having years of experience in law. This equivalent experience in law is simply not held by private equity firms at their management. Private equity firms are also unlikely to listen to the lawyers. Note, even if they were to listen, even in the worst case for us, they don't have the capacity to understand what these lawyers are telling them. And since they're not going to trust them blindly, they're going to default to their own criteria and metrics, which tend to be profit-oriented rather than understanding nuances of legal law. But we think that they're also unlikely to listen to lawyers at all. Private equity firms, or let's say consultant managers, tend to think of themselves as experts on everything. They believe that everything can be understood through economic lenses. Think of the McKinsey management consultants who feel comfortable giving advice to people in all fields of business and life, despite only ever looking at things through their economically neoliberal lens. In other words, they have overinflated confidence and specifically a distrust of lawyers who have very different education to them and who they have potentially even some inferiority complexes towards. They're unlikely to listen to them. The next mechanism, after incentives and expertise, is familiarity. Lawyers have a personal familiarity with the lawyers, and the managing partners in law firms have a personal familiarity with the clients. It is crucial to maintain clients in the long term. For most law firms, spontaneous clients pay less than clients who hold you on retainer, who are often clients who have more legal requirements, access to a larger team. These are also clients that you can rely on more. It's crucial to maintain them in the long term, but they tend to have high expectations and want to be treated personally. They want to feel that they are personally seen by the law firm, that they're given personal attention to. This means knowing where to take them to dinner or what gift to bring them is as crucial to maintaining them as making sure that they have good representation, making sure that the right lawyer is being assigned to the right case that's going to appeal to the specific client. The second familiarity is with the coworkers who lead specific cases. What are the strengths and weaknesses of each lawyer? What support do they likely need, i.e. in terms of second chair assistance or access to paralegals? Let's take a POI now from closing.
Yeah, so
Opening.
the question is,
Yeah.
all the analysis or characterization that you are giving to PE firms can also be said for lawyers. Like, it can be a rich kid who just has inheritance from his dad, who just wants to open. Being a lawyer doesn't mean you run a firm efficiently.
You're right. It could be a rich kid, but there's a significant recruiting process where you spend years, where you have to get accepted to law school, pass the bar, spend years as an associate, make junior partner after you're sponsored by a senior partner, get advanced to senior partner, and only then you actually have say in the company. Someone who's just a snobbish rich kid is never going to get to that stage, at least not in a company, in a law firm that values itself. Next on familiarity is familiarity with specific cases in the current condition of the firm. Is the firm itself currently overworked? Are they at risk of needing more paralegals? Can they afford to take a pro bono right now? Do they have to take a pro bono right now to deal with PR? The impacting of this is better management of specific cases and of the firm's resources as a whole, better representation for clients, and better bang for your buck representation, meaning more justice overall. We also flip the likelihood of lawyers wanting to enter law. If we're able to prove better conditions and pay, better treatment of lawyers, and better who are more listened to and more successes in court, and them having more control and agency over time, the potential to influence the firm rather than having to follow bad orders, we show that more lawyers enter law. And for all of these reasons, closing government.
I would like to thank Speaker very much for her speech. And now I would like to invite the last speaker for the government.
All right, can everyone see and hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay. Pick POIs, my pick minutes, if I'm mostly by chat. If I'm not taking it, just feel free to like nudge me. Most likely I'll take it. All right, cool. Sorry. Without contest, there's no way you are going to enjoy this debate, Ilya. I'm not very, very jealous of your position right now. I don't think this is a debate where PE firms are taking over all traditional law firms. There's no reason for why that should necessarily exist, because we'd like to think that this movement would mean some of them shift, some of them do not shift. And therefore, the teams which do not analyze why it is most likely that this shift will happen in the first place cannot go ahead to claim all of the benefits which necessarily happen. We are the only team which contextualizes to you why essentially PE firms would be incentivized to move into this space in the first place, given their incentives which are already aligned, which is for them to be a profit incentive. So what kind of firms would they first of all be moving for? Most likely, these are firms which are already dying or are failing or are not living up to their expectation to a huge degree. But underpinning all of this, PE firms do not go for firms which are failing, regardless of what industry they are in, but rather they look at companies which are actually undervalued or underperforming, but have a higher upshoot for potential. How do they necessarily do this? They realize that sometimes these firms need a little bit more investment or cash injection in order to do so, and they realize that the existing managers do not have the capacity to do so. Maybe they are just bad managers, right? But the way in which they do the takeover is always to ensure that they are propping up these companies so that it will be valuable in the future and then they can sell. I think this clarification defeats a lot of things which comes from closing opposition, which is a description of bad businessmen and not inherently how PEs necessarily look like. Because for fuck's sake, if you say that the PE firms are arrogant, so they will not listen to lawyers, and then they will rather run into debt, I'm not sure how that person owns a PE firm in the first place. Most likely, they'll do everything they can in order to ensure that the profitability exists. That includes hiring management consultancy firms to be able to consult on these things in the first place. Secondly, engaging the existing partners to be able to understand how the business works and then what necessarily is needed to be able to transform this. Do you need to keep the old owners? Do you need to keep the lawyers engaged? Do you need to keep the lawyers in touch with their clients? They are going to do these things if it is in the best interest of the firm. The only other thing they say is that, well, they focus on the short-term incentive. This does not engage with our context, because for the context of most of these corporations who are underperforming or who are eventually going to die, any short-term performance is key for them to be able to have any long-term existence even in the first place, which means that if most likely you just focus on the long term, you're most likely going to engage in the actions which are still likely going to kill them. I'm not sure why short-term incentives in themselves are necessarily bad. I'm not even arguing that lawyers in themselves cannot be better managers like OG. But if they, like, we think they can be lawyers who are better managers, lawyers who are bad managers. But if they are and are indeed crucial, they most likely would be involved in most of these things. With that being out of the way, let me weigh why this is particularly important. Because start looking at the benefits which comes from opening governments. They say they have more law firms, more lawsuits, or partners who are essentially bad managers or having a lot of conflicts of interest. I'm not sure how that changes on the upside where these corporations are doing very, very well, because there's an admittance that for corporations or for law firms which have partners who are very rich, they most likely would be able to expand and have all of these benefits. They most likely have partners who are very, very good at managing these things, and therefore they will not face the problem which they're talking about. They most likely would be able to expand to be able to have more lawsuits and more quality of lawsuits. Where this debate becomes very impactful is in this group of companies which we are talking about, because these are firms which most likely would fail, leading to massive layoffs of a lot of lawyers who most likely will lose their job and will not have the capacity to be reintegrated back into the system. That is where the ineffective representation comes in, because most likely you have lawyers who are stretched very, very thin because of how the company is underperforming. It is the clogged up systems, because when these individuals are laid off, it sends a signal to the market that there are no jobs within the market, and getting people not to want to study and not to be not taken up within the pipeline. So this is the most probable case. This is the most plausible case. Other teams have given you probable indications of how this motion will exist. This is the most plausible one, which brings the most impact and tackles the key things we need within this debate. Let me deal with a couple of extraneous responses which comes to our case, because we don't get a lot of response from member at all. They say that, well, there's lack of proper representation because pro bono will not exist. In context of our world, realize that pro bonos in themselves exist to a very, very minimum degree. But PE firms still have all the incentives of private corporations, which means they are engaged in corporate social responsibility as a result of their reputation and also to be able to gain more market share. And most of them, because they have more investment and they will have more lawyers on the comparative than in the counterfactual, they are more likely going to be able to take on more pro bono cases. Secondly, you need to realize that the quality decreases down the hierarchy of most law firms, given that most of these law firms who have huge reputations are able to create oligopolies to be able to prevent the competition which essentially comes, which means that even new law firms which are coming in here lack the ability to be able to compete. Thirdly, they say court-appointed lawyers, and I think this is dependent on the pro bono claim. They speak about incentive to pursue careers, but being partner is not the aspiration of all lawyers. And these aspirations are socially reconstructed. So in a world of PE, you are most likely going to become a manager. I think that's something you can do.
Yeah, if, as your opening characterizes, there's a shortage of lawyers, surely individual firms failing isn't as big of a harm because there's demand in other firms for these lawyers to get laid off. But also, it's not always true that law firms can recover just with more money. Why is it good to prop up firms that will fail eventually?
No, I think your second one is what I heard the most. I think it's not always about just the money. Sometimes it's a little bit investment on the expertise side and a lot of other things. There are some firms who have taken up a lot of debt and therefore they need it cleared away, and therefore a partnership can be able to do so. I think we represent all of the different scenarios which essentially come in. I think that law firms still remain one of the biggest employers, and this is just one of the benefits. Even if you take it down, it's not something that you're able to take away completely. The last claim I want to deal with is the issue of personal liability, which comes on their side, that they said there's a way this leads to increased accountability and scrutiny. I would say that corporate governance structures continue to exist within PE firms who are regulated by the larger markets. I think that there is an incentive for them to be able to study the industry and make sure that they are gaining the level of experience which is required to be able to be successful in there. In most cases, these guys say they are stretched thin. In most cases, if they are stretched thin and they will not make any profit, it means that they lose their investors, which means that that's a decision that they will not take whenever they feel that this is the case to do so. It means that the most likely markets they are entering into are ones where they will most likely make profits. Personal connection is not the ultimate thing to be able to break this debate. Most at times, even personal connections can ruin lawsuits in most instances, given the level of affiliation that you have with most of these people. We think that we provide the most plausible context and the most benefits. Thank you.
I would like to thank Speaker very much for your speech, and I would like to invite the last speaker for the opposition.
Can you clearly hear me?
Yep.
Okay, great. 3, 2, 1. We're going to win this debate by showing you why on the metric of where companies are better managed, we win by engaging with the OG ideas here. And then I'm going to weigh this metric of management against A, the amount of investment, and B, the amount of ethical pro bono things that both OO and OG talk about. I want to start with taking CG out of the round, though, because CG has a few things that they do funny. One, their characterization of only we can talk about the round because we characterize how the transition will go. Look at the motion. The motion doesn't talk about a transition. It talks about law firms as a whole transitioning to this model. The CG claim is not what underpins the round, but more specifically engaging with their impact. Number one, it is unclear to me why you cannot identify as a very successful partner in a successful firm. So someone who's like a senior partner, but not a management partner. Those same firms that they say will be like not doing well, but are optimized and have a good business model. If they are so successful, you probably want to join them as a role of a managing partner. And that means that you probably overtake them and you can get all of their benefits. But the second and more substantial response I want to give here is on CG's impact. Number one, workers are a small amount of people as opposed to the clients that they cater to every day. There is one lawyer and every day they cater to 5 cases that often have many plaintiffs in them and many victims and families of the victims that will be affected. We care significantly less than the benefit of the people and of the lawyer that's persecuting. Secondly, it is unclear to me why if they were engaged in a firm that was done well, if they were hired by a firm that has a good business model, why those competent hirees can't be hired somewhere else. The same is true about a small firm that doesn't succeed and fails. Maybe they're just a very, I think law is in very high demand in the public sector and the private sector. Even if they came from a failing firm, they will probably want to be hired. For all those reasons, I think CG's impact doesn't really matter. They will get rehired and they matter to us less. let's now talk about what Ayala's explanation is in terms of expertise uniquely. The first thing I want to note that is very important here is just the idea of expertise that you get as a lawyer and the ability that it means when managing your firm. It's the fact that they know better what to do in a specific case in terms of the chances of success. The fact that you probably want to hire more diagnosticians because looking at evidence is something that's important to you. So that means the hiring decision that a managing partner that it comes from their firms that don't understand simply won't be able to recognize. Secondly, it's the fact that you know that there are all sorts of trends that affect your discipline. So if you're in criminal law, you probably know that immigration doesn't affect it so much because it's in the long term and stuff like that. But probably someone that comes from this firm doesn't understand this and will think that we need to amp up operations right now. It's the fact that skills in hiring and being able to recognize who did a good job and which cases are rough to beat is something that you can only do if on the hiring table you have someone who's engaged in this practice. All these things underpin the kind of workers that you have, the kind of cases that you pick, and those sorts of things. We think that people don't listen, that these firms won't listen to the lawyers for the very simple reason that, as I'll explain, they view it as not their niche. They view the lawyers as someone who engages in the professional aspect and me as someone that engages in the economic aspects of hiring and stuff like that. I was trained to do this and not the lawyer. But secondly, even if they want to listen to the lawyer, there are so many voices within their own firm of the lawyer or maybe subpar lawyers that have wrong opinions that within all this noise, without the expertise, I don't know which opinion is correct, so we'll default to my correct opinion. But thirdly, we also tell you, well, you have significantly less time to evaluate what the right opinion is because your portfolio is so widespread. And even if you're a team, even if you're not just one person, the fact that you're engaging with several law firms in different disciplines and with firms in farming and stuff like that, because you need to invest in such in a wide way in order for one of them to become a unicorn and succeed, means that you don't have the time to evaluate as in depth as a partner. All those things are unique to the CO extension. Now let's talk about OG and how we beat them on the question of expertise. OG tell us, I want to give a characterization here that I think tackles most of what OG is saying. Look, I think that there are many people that serve as partners and in managing roles. The simple reason for this is because people don't want to share in the brunt on their own. They don't want the responsibility of the company collapsing being only on their shoulders. They don't want the long hours in the office only on their shoulders. They don't want to be the only ones that have to pay and thus have to pay more out of their pocket, which is why we empirically see things like junior partners, associate partners, senior partners, managing partners, all being different degrees that have many, many people within them within each firm. What does this do to the OG case? Number one, it explains why there isn't a problem of promoting the young lawyers, because it's not that as a managing partner that decides who to promote, they're taking my job, I'm promoting them to a junior position. Secondly, the fact that there's less contact with a specific case and you're not sentimental is true also on our side, because the managing partners that decide which cases to take on are not directly proximate at this point in their career. They make cross decisions about what to prioritize. But lastly, when they say disagreements within the company matter a lot, we tell you that this is actually a great thing, because that concedes that on their side you have a centralized single person that makes decisions. We think this is bad if they fall into their intuitions, which, as we explained, are not experienced. On our side of the house, the multiple scrutiny that OG concedes is unique means that you have to check your biases and you have to convince for why you might be right the other members and the other partners. Why does this matter more than the amount of investment that you get? Number one, diminishing returns. Even if you have slightly less people, even if you have slightly less money that you can invest, you invest it in the important cases, in the ones that will yield the most profit, in the cases that need it most, in those that cannot wait, in a murder that happens now and not a corporate pursuit, which is something that can wait a year. But secondly, if you are more effective, you also make more profit. The reason for this is that success in trials and being able to have the right person there means that you finish the trial in less time, which means you can get more bang for your buck for every month that you act as a law firm. But thirdly, I also think that there are access to alternate forms of funding on their side, whereas there is no alternate form of managing your company efficiently. Before I explain why that's true, top half.
If OO says that law firms are so profitable, then you probably have your own division that actually manages this with spec knowledge. Spec knowledge is not required to understand divisions of law and returns.
But
spec
George, you yourself,
to
your case is predicated on stuff like these people making decisions about hiring and stuff like that. I already explained to you it's likely that they want a lot of reach within the company because they think they know better. The last thing I want to talk about is why you have access to alternate sources. OG say you can only fund it through the partner's pockets. This is bullshit because the info doesn't say that, but also it makes makes no sense. They're commercial entities. They can be invested in through other entities. We think that the government invests today a lot in entities where the companies don't, not only because they provide an important service to the public, which means that it's seen as a public service and thus they want to invest in it, but also because they know that there is need. They know that people will not be able to get good representation through public representatives, which is why they fund these things in the absence of corporations funding them. Lastly, why does this beat OO? Look, I just think that the affordability and pro bono stuff from OO is, as OG point out, empirically bullshit. The fact that there are still incentives for these very high people to still get the most money, especially if you suffer from scarcity, as OG explained, means that the OO case about pro bono doesn't work, but also we affect all cases, both pro bono and non-pro bono. For those reasons, CO.
I'd like to thank Speaker much for his speech and everyone for this very great and interesting debate. This is a close round, so you can go on with your lives for today. So good luck tomorrow. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thank you.